A side, B side, what side are you on?
Welcome back, Adam. It's another A-side, B-side podcast.
Welcome back, Brooke.
I feel like I'm in your lane now with like the drama and the singing. And
yeah, I know that secretly you've always wanted to do an all singing podcast, just like Buffy did with their episodes. So.
Yes, I always have, but I don't know how well like singing and murder. Although Sweeney Todd,
I was gonna be like murder in musicals happens all the time. So
that's true.
I think it would be a more question of planning ahead and having to write everything down to music. That's so if we get a sponsor, if somebody wants to sponsor us taking off work for a week and just writing everything to music, then sure.
So you sound a bit congested. What's going on? It's not the vid, is it?
It's not. No. I've taken 2 at-home tests already in the last 3 days. I had a very fun weekend, and it's been one of those weekends or weeks in Minnesota where in the daytime it's like 65 and gorgeous, and then you're having a good time and you're out, and then on your way home it's suddenly like 28 degrees. And you are not prepared.
Yeah.
So Monday night, I walked home from a very nice concert, and was not wearing probably had a heavy enough jacket, and it's like, well, I'm gonna get a head cold by the time I get home. And woke up the next morning, and there it was. But still took the test because you still gotta just in case.
Right, you gotta just in case. Yeah, I had to do that last week.
And I don't know. I lucked out. I have a clinic in like the main floor of my building that does tests for free. So even when I don't have any of the government tests that have been sent out, I can just walk downstairs during business hours and get a test. I mean, I would almost like to take credit for that, but it wasn't here when I moved in. So I just lucked out.
Nice. Very nice. Very nice. Well, at least you know it's just a cold and not the Rona. And not the, what is it, the alphabet strain as they're calling it these days?
Oh, there's another one. I have not been paying attention. Since I don't have to go out in public very often, it makes things pretty easy. But that'll be changing soon as the winter comes and the restaurant reopens. So I'll probably hear all about the various strains soon.
Yeah, they keep it's all these different letters, and it's like the alphabet strain, and it's supposed to be a little bit more dangerous, and isn't it always more? It's just be careful, be safe, take your precautions is what that's what you got to do.
Yeah, and hopefully employers are still being good about just letting people take time off, because even if you've just got a head cold or a little bug or something, you probably shouldn't be at work, period. So
right, don't be spreading that.
Yeah, this whole idea of where we were 4 years ago of don't use your vacation time. I hope we don't get back to that.
Well, here's the thing. Here, is it a cold? Is it corona? Is it the allergies from being so flat and then dusty? And so every morning you're like, okay, wait, what is this? Is it the allergy? Is it cold? Is it? It's allergies. Okay, all right.
My allergies always just have eye itching, and I don't believe that I found to be a sign of corona. So I've always been pleased. I was like, oh, that was the first time in my life I'm happy my eyes are itchy.
So of course, Love is Blind. They do the episodes, like the very first week it was 4 episodes, and last week it was 3, and this week it's the final 3, and then next week it'll be the reunion. And I just have to tell you, I don't know if you've started it. I know you've watched the previous 2, right? Or did you just watch the first one?
I watched the first one and then half of the second one. And I've watched half of the second one twice trying to get into it and just could not. I don't know if that's just where I was as an audience member, but I found myself like watching and then looking up and realizing that I'd actually been on my phone for 20 minutes and I have no idea what's going on. Well, and usually I can follow along even when I'm doing 2 or 3 things, but I just couldn't.
This one might pique your interest a little more. There's a little bit more. It's a bit more drama-y-ish, whatever. Like the first season, because it was brand new, nobody had ever heard of it. When people went on, it genuinely was like, I am trying to find love. Second season, maybe I'm trying to find love, maybe I'm trying to get on TV.
Right.
This one is, am I trying to get on TV? Am I here for the drama, or am I in love?
Yeah. And that last one is probably contingent on how it affects the first two.
Yeah. So there is one couple that I really do like and I'm rooting for, and I don't want to give you names because I don't want to spoil anything for you, but there's one couple that I'm rooting for. There's one couple where the dude is like, he's just a walking red flag, and
Awesome.
I hope she runs far and fast, like run, Forrest, run.
Oh.
Because it's bad. There's another couple where she, I feel, is a complete and total gold digger. And just very selfish. She's like, there's no compromise in her at all. And it's like, well, do you know what being in a relationship is? Because there's gotta be some compromise.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another couple where he's toxic. Like, just get out. He's toxic. So I'm not gonna say he's the giant red flag like the other dude, but he's toxic, and I think she could do so much better.
So it's interesting because I felt like the first season there were more, I guess it was pretty balanced, but like the red flag people didn't seem to make it to the end. They got cut pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
And you only had like two really just red flag people, and they were both women in the first season who made it to the end. So I wonder if it's like, I know in season 2 there was the one dude who kind of came like the breakout star of it. What was his name?
On season 2?
Yeah. And he just came in just like very like, I'm here to find a wife, but very like full of himself. Oh man, this is why I need to do actual research. It was Shake, right?
Who? Oh, Shake. Yes. Oh, yeah.
Like he came in specifically, it almost was, he was like, hey, I'm here to make a name for myself. I've got a weird nickname because that's not my actual name. I'm just saying stuff that like I know is going to get on camera. And so it seemed like he got a little bit of like, even like afterwards, he's like, I'm the villain. I get it. I'm the bad guy. Like kind of doing this whole thing, like trying to make a name for himself because no publicity is bad publicity. So now maybe they've got more guys on there that are thinking like, if I act like a jerk, it'll work out for me.
I think for Shake, it didn't go in his favor because most people don't even remember him.
That's true. It was a very much they disliked him for that one season.
Like they did the love right 2 weeks before this season started. It was Love After the Altar, and like everybody from season 2 got back together, and he wasn't even there. Like nobody even wanted him there. And I think they mentioned his name once. So whatever he was trying to build from this, I don't really think it works in his favor.
It didn't work out. Okay. Well, that's good. I mean, I'm trying to think about what's his name from like 4th season of Real World. It was like Ant or Pug or
Puck.
Puck. Yeah, geez. Mm-hmm. Wow, I was close. I am so bad with names. Like
I'm here to help out.
It's not good. Like if I ever got taken hostage and they're like, name all the people you know, I'd be like, guys, just shoot me. I mean, really. Like I at this point, I'm not even sure what my name is.
But I think aside from that, there is a brand new show. I was just telling my mom about this. I need to start it on Netflix, and it's called Inside Man, and it's got Stanley Tucci as the star and also David Tennant, and I heard it's amazing. It's only 4 episodes. I don't know if it's British based or American based because the British series tend to be very short.
But they're longer episodes. It's like an hour and a half.
So that is going to be on my list to start.
I just saw a couple like things pop up in my either Twitter or Instagram or one of the feeds that it was out now, so I should check it out. And I was like, oh, okay. But I hadn't heard about it at all before.
I hadn't either. And then all of a sudden it was all over TikTok, and I was I think I saw it pop up. Like I get emails from Netflix and it was like coming soon, and I was like, oh, okay, whatever. And then all of a sudden it was all over TikTok, and everybody's like, you got to watch, it's amazing. Which it's Stanley Tucci, so I don't expect it to be bad, and David Tennant. So,
and it's been out for like over a month. Like it came out in September, according to the interwebs.
Oh.
So it really feels like maybe it was released in the UK. I don't know.
I have a friend over there. I'll ask to see if they've even watched it and if it came out over there first, because it wouldn't surprise me. Because
I mean, that would make sense.
Yeah. But yeah, it looks like it's going to be really, really good. So I'm excited for that.
And the guy who's running it is the guy who was the creative force behind the Sherlock series as well, Stephen Moffat.
Yeah, so, that's right. So I bet it is British based, and because he's also behind Doctor Who.
Yeah, Stephen Moffat. It makes sense that he got David Tennant involved. And, very cool. Yeah, I will. That is on the list. I have had The Peripheral, which is on Amazon Prime, on my ready to go, like getting ready to watch for an entire week. And then every time I sit down to watch it, I'm like, I know it's one of those where it feels like it's going to be intensive thought. Like I'm going to have to pay attention. So I can't do it when I'm in a scattered moment, or when I want to have 2 soccer games on at the same time on the side. So I need to be able to just sit down and focus on it.
Right.
So I'm very excited about that one because it looks really interesting, and I'm hopeful. I just like that there's something that is seemingly a new sci-fi that's not just a reboot of something old. But I'm sure when I'm getting there, I'll find out it's actually like a 1922 short story or something.
Have you heard that Quiet Place? Did you watch that, Adam?
I did not, because I would not actually see any of the movie. I would spend the entire movie with one hand over my eyes and my other hand's somehow trying to close my ears. And that's just not a good way to spend $17.
Well, they've got the Quiet Place, and then they have the sequel. Now they're doing the prequel. It's called A Quiet Place Day One. I think it's called Day One. And Lupita Nyong'o is going to be the star.
Oh, very nice.
But it's still based off of the John Krasinski John Krasinski from The Office. He's the one that created A Quiet Place, and he's the creator behind this as well.
And speaking of John Krasinski, they've got Jack Ryan season 3 is coming out soon. Nice. I've seen some ads for that. As you can tell, I'm watching a lot of Prime, so I get a lot of. It's very impressive what they're doing with the Thursday Night Football on Amazon Prime, because it's getting me to watch other Prime shows, and I'm like, this is the method in the madness.
Well, that's the thing. That was the thing that everybody was like, okay, is this going to work? And apparently, it is working.
And it's been, some of the games have been really horrible, but the last couple of games have been good. And it's fun that you can log in, and it gives you 3 different ways that you can watch it. There's the regular broadcast, there's the broadcast with extra stats on the side. And then there's usually a third broadcast. And that I think at one point it was the Dude Perfect guys were talking about the game. And another time it was Leslie Storm and Hannah Storm, Leslie Visser, who were 2 of the, original sideline reporters who've gone on to do everything in sports, but doing play-by-play as well. So you have the option of curating your experience if you so wish, which is kind of cool.
That is cool. That is cool. Well, we know I'm a big Prime Video fan because they had me out to do the ACM. So
yeah, I'm just doing one for the team,
Well, this is episode 115. Can you believe it? 115.
I can, because I can always forget what number it is. So I actually had it in my head that we were on 113 today, but I knew it was odd.
You knew it was my week, right?
Yeah, that one I was very convinced with. I was like, it's okay. I don't have to go first.
All right, so episode 115, which means that, I get to start this week. Are you ready for that?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
So this week, we are talking about an individual that was quite disturbed at a very, very early age. Her name is Mary Bell, and I have to thank my friend Christina Williams, who sent me this, and she said, have you done this yet for your podcast? And I was like, no, we haven't, but we absolutely are going to. because this is juicy. So Mary Bell, her mother was Elizabeth Betty Bell. Her maiden name was McCricket, and she was a well-known sex worker. Mary was born May 26th of 1957 in Corbridge, Northumberland, England. So Betty was frequently not home because she traveled for work. She traveled to Glasgow for work as a sex worker, and she'd leave the children behind in the care of their father if he was around. Mary was, I've read, there's a little confusion because I've read that Mary was her second born, then I've read that Mary was her firstborn. It all depends on the story. So there is a little bit of confusion in her order, but she was one of the earlier children. Betty, her mom, was only 17 years old when she was born, and she reportedly told doctors, "Take that thing away from me." That's according to Mary's aunt, Isa McCricket.
Not a great first impression.
Not a great start in life, no. The identity of Mary's biological father isn't known. For most of her life, Mary believed that her father was William Billy Bell, who was a violent person. He was alcoholic. He was a habitual criminal. He ended up being arrested for armed robbery. When she was a baby, William married her mom, and all she knew for many, many years was that was her dad, but she never knew if that was actually her biological father. As a baby, a toddler, a kid, Mary suffered unfortunate injuries in the house when she was alone with her mom. It led many people to believe that her mom was either just negligent, like intentionally, or she was purposely hurting her. Some people think that her mom suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy. There was one occasion in around 1960 where Betty ended up dropping Mary from a first floor window, and it damaged Mary's prefrontal cortex. And we've talked about how traumatic brain injury changes people's personalities. And this
often comes up in our stories.
Often it does. And we've seen that this can be a contributing factor to creating serial killers.
Some divergent behaviors.
There was another occasion where Betty forced Mary to take a bunch of sleeping pills.
Yikes.
She was also known to have one time sold Mary to a woman who was mentally unfit and unable to have children of her own. Well, Betty's sister Catherine found out and traveled alone across Newcastle to reclaim Mary from this woman and return her to her mother Betty.
I love the first part, don't love the second part.
Right. Had it been like a woman that was mentally fit, I would have been like, leave her. But the fact that she was unfit herself.
Yeah, you got to go get her, but maybe don't give her back to
don't give her back to the mom who just sold her.
Yeah. That's an awkward, like, do you have a receipt for this?
Right. So despite the negligence and abuse that Betty repeatedly inflicted upon Mary, she refused offers from her family to take custody.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't get it. Like, if you're telling the doctors, take this thing away from me, you're constantly neglecting her, you're abusing her, you've tried to sell her, why would you be like, no, you can't have her?
I mean, you could theorize that it might be when you're not high, you can't imagine not having your kid, but then when you're trying to get high, all you want to do is get high.
Well, and it could be attributed to that Munchausen by proxy syndrome, because she may have just enjoyed the attention and the sympathy that she received, sure, when Mary was hurt or whatever. Mary's mom, Betty, is alleged to have allowed or even encouraged her clients to abuse Mary beginning at the age of 4.
Jeez.
Yeah. By the time she was 5, she had experienced loss of a tremendous kind because she had actually seen a friend of hers get run over by a bus. Now, this is just my input. This is my personal opinion. There is nothing backing this, but I am wondering if, with all that's going on and what we're about to find out, Did she witness it? And she was just purely a witness, or is there more? I don't know. We'll never know.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. When you start looking back at people's history, you're like, okay, maybe that one thing wasn't a thing that a thing is. The way we thought the thing was.
That thing might be the different thing. Yes.
Yeah.
So both at home and at school, Mary displayed numerous disturbing signs. She had unpredictable behavior. She had sudden mood swings. She had chronic bedwetting. Another thing that we have talked about when it comes to serial killers, one of the McDonald triad signs or predictors of a serial killer is chronic bedwetting. The other two, animal abuse and arson. So Mary is known to have been in fights, like a lot of fights with both boys and girls. She had even attempted to strangle or suffocate her classmates on several occasions. One occasion, she is known to have tried to block the trachea of a young girl with sand. Can you imagine shoving sand in another kid's mouth?
I mean, I have a little bit of a scratchy throat right now, but it feels like that'd be a lot worse.
Yeah, because like when sand is wet and it's clumpy and it's thick and you can't, there's nothing, like even water barely gets through it. That's how you build sandcastles.
That's how you put sandbags down to stop a flood. So
right. So she's shoved this down a child's trachea. That's
not great.
No. Her violent behavior made other kids not want to play with her and also made her not socialize because nobody wanted to play with her. She did have one friend. Her name was Norma Joyce Bell, not related. Norma was born in 1955, and she was the 13-year-old daughter of a next door neighbor. Again, same last name, no relation whatsoever. So one of the signs that Mary was, her classmates and peers had become so accustomed to her drastic mood changes that they started to notice the signs of when she was going to have a shift. Like one of the signs of a shift would be shaking of her head, and then she would just get this like intense gaze, and they knew, okay, she's about to change up, she's about to be violent, and whoever her stare was focused on, that was about to be the focus of her attack.
Yikes.
So on May 11th of 1968, it was a Saturday, a 3-year-old boy was found wandering dazed and bleeding in this area called Scotswood. This little boy later tells police that he'd been playing with Mary Bell and Norma Bell on top of an old air raid shelter when he fell. He fell from the roof to the ground, and he ended up with a severe head laceration. Initially, it was believed that it was an accident, like he literally just fell. But the little boy said, no, I was pushed. But he wasn't sure which one of the girls had actually pushed him. The next day, mothers of 3 different small girls contact police to complain that both Mary and Norma had tried to strangle their children as they played in the sandpit. Remember, trachea incident. That night, both of the girls are interviewed by the police about all of the incidents in question. Both girls deny any, responsibility in the air raid accident. They claim that they had just stumbled upon the boy and they found him and he was bleeding from his head after he had fallen. They're like, oh, we don't know. We just found him. They also asked them about the attempted strangulation of the 3 girls. Mary's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Norma, although, did say that Mary had tried to, quote, throttle each of the girls. She was stated as saying, Mary went to one of the girls and said, what happens if you choke someone? Do they die? Then Mary put her hands around the girl's throat and squeezed. The girl started to go purple. I told Mary to stop, but she wouldn't. Then she put her hands around Pauline's throat and she started going purple as well. Another girl, Susan Cornish, came up and Mary did the same thing to her. So local authorities are notified about Mary's violent nature, but due to her age and Norma's age, they're just given a warning. And that's it.
Okay, that seems a little light for a triple attempted murder, but all right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess you could rationalize it that she just had a scientific theorem that she was trying to prove, and the 3 attempts were to see what happens, and then people turn purple.
She had a hypothesis, and she was testing that hypothesis.
Yeah. I mean, this was just, just scientific, theory in action.
Yeah. I don't think so.
Probably not.
So here's the thing. In the 1960s, Newcastle upon Tyne, they went through a significant revitalization renewal project. A bunch of the inner city boroughs that were like Victorian era, they were Victorian era terraces, but they had turned into slums. So they were demolished so that modern houses and flats could be built. But several families still lived in the buildings that were marked for demolition as they waited for rehousing by the council. The council there think Section 8 housing here.
Gotcha.
So a lot of local children would play in or around these dilapidated houses, and they'd be in the and also there's like a lot of rubble strewn fields that like wide expanses that had demolished or partially cleared buildings by the contractors. So just houses and apartments that are being demolished, but parts of them are gone, parts of them are not. There's lots of open spaces, lots of field. So there's a lot of kids playing in these areas, right?
Kids everywhere.
So this area became known to children as the Tin Lizzie. There's a street that ran parallel to this Tin Lizzie area, and it was called St. Margaret's Road. Okay. All right. On May 25th of 1968, it was one day before Mary's 11th birthday. Mary strangles 4-year-old Martin Brown in an upstairs bedroom of one of these abandoned houses on St. Margaret's Road. She's believed to have committed this crime alone. Now, again, this is in Scotswood, England. So Martin Brown's body was discovered by 3 children about 3:30 p.m. that afternoon. He was lying on his back with his arms over his head, and there was specks of blood and foam around his mouth, but there was no signs of violence on his body. A local construction, why couldn't I think of the word? A local construction guy named John Hall, he arrives on the scene. He tries to perform CPR, but it doesn't work. Next to the body, there's a bottle of painkillers found.
So giving it a plausible idea of this could have been suicide? Possibly.
I mean, Mary did have the pills that her mom had given her from years before, over time, but I don't know. Well, then never mind, because that's making sense in my head because we know it's Mary, but that wouldn't make sense then. Okay, never mind. So I don't know what they initially thought about the pills, but as the construction worker, John Hall attempts suicide. Well, guess who shows up?
He attempted CPR.
Yes. Sorry. Yes.
That's okay.
Yes. Okay. Suicide's on my brain because we were just saying. Okay. Yes. So as he attempts CPR, guess who pops up? 10-year-old Mary and 13-year-old Norma. They appear in the doorway of the bedroom like, hey, what's going on? Of course.
What happened here?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. What's going on? They're quickly shooed out of the room, the house. The two go to Martin's aunt's house, Rita Finley, and they say, one of your sister's bairns, this is the word they used, one of your sister's bairns just had an accident. We think it's Martin, but we can't tell because there's blood all over him, which is a Northern English term for child, bairns.
Yeah, that's a term that I have heard. This is fun because Newcastle's my Premier League team, and I've gotten to know a few guys in the local group that we watch Newcastle games at a local pub. So I've heard them say some of these words before, and so it's cool to see it from a different angle. But yeah, bairn is I believe the way it's said.
Baron. Okay. Well, the next day, Dr. Bernard Knight conducts, a postmortem check of the body, and he's unable to find any signs of violence on little Martin's body. So they're not able to really determine his cause of death. But he said, even though there's no signs of violence on his body, something weird happened. And of course, they found the tablets. So they're thinking, well, maybe he died by ingesting some poison.
Yeah, his death, he thought was candy or.
Yeah. So his death ends up being ruled an accident. So some days after Martin's death, in a game of chicken, Both of the girls go to his mom's house and they ask to see him. His mother, June, informs them, hey, I'm sorry, but there's been an accident and Martin has passed away. And Mary says she knew, she just wanted to see him in his coffin. Martin's mother, June, slams the door on Mary's face. How freaked out would you be if some child said, oh yeah, I know your kid died, I just wanted to see him in the coffin? What?
I mean, but sometimes kids are just like, they don't get the gravity of what they're saying, like they were like, oh, this is gonna come up like a psycho killer, and it's just like, oh, like there is grandma. I remember a moment at one of my great grandma's funeral this year where some of my cousin's younger kids were coming to that realization that's we're at the funeral, that's great grandma. Mm-hmm. And so there was some definite confusion there. One of them asked if like she was going to get up or she was taking a nap, so it was the natural curiosity, but this doesn't sound like that.
No, this is a bit more creepy. So on Mary's 11th birthday, which was May 26th, she and Norma celebrate by breaking in and vandalizing a nursery in nearby Woodland Crescent. They oh my gosh. So they get in by peeling some tiles off the roof. Once inside, they're tearing up books, they're flipping desks, they get ink and they smear it all over, and they get some paint and they're putting that everywhere, and then they leave.
They're like, hey, we're just gonna trash the school.
They thought they were in a rock video or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, of course, the next day, the staff comes and they discover the vandalism and the break-in, and they call the police. And there were 4 separate notes that were found inside the nursery, when the police came to investigate. And they claimed responsibility for the murder of Martin Brown. One of the notes stated, and I'm quoting, "I murder so that I may come back." Another read, "We did murder Martine Brown. Fuck of, you bastard." I'm reading it exactly as it was written. Again, this is an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old.
Yeah. It's destroying a school. Wow.
The third note read, "Futch off, we murder. We out Fanny and." And the final note read, "You are mice. Why? Because we murdered Martine. Go Brown, you bet. Look out there are murders about by Fanny and old you screws."
So is that their handle that they're using?
I don't know if they were trying to be derogatory because the grammar is and the spelling is so bad. I don't know if that's their handle, if they were trying to be derogatory and call names, because in the UK, Fanny means something totally different than what it means here.
And so does the other word. Back at that time, it was often a cigarette, right?
Yeah. So again, I'm quoting. I'm not trying to be derogatory in any way. I'm reading the note verbatim.
Like it almost feels like they were like trying to create like Bonnie and Clyde, but theirs was F***ing and Fanny.
Yeah, I don't know.
So the police clearly didn't go through a marketing department.
No, not at 10 and 13, Adam.
Just saying. You could workshop that. Maybe ask Martin's opinion before you off it.
He was way younger anyway. So the police see the notes and, of course, the vandalism, and they think it's just a prank. It's a tasteless, childish prank. The nursery school installed an alarm because this was just the latest in a string of nursery school break-ins.
And I love how they got in through they took tiles off the roof.
Yeah.
Which
weird.
Doesn't even, what are they doing on the roof?
Well, what were they doing on top of an air raid shelter?
And they are kids. I even as a soon-to-be 42-year-old adult, it's fun to climb stuff. Yeah. I don't get a lot of use out of it right now. But it is fun.
So when the girls go back to school, they're bragging, they're taking responsibility for the break-ins. They're also taking responsibility for Martin's death. But of course, nobody believes them because they're just an 11 and 13-year-old girl. And also, Mary had a reputation of being a liar and a show-off.
Right.
Then another young boy ends up dead. On the afternoon of July 31st of 1968, this is 2 months after Martin, a 3-year-old named Brian Howe was last seen by his parents outside of his house playing with one of his siblings and the family dog, and Mary and Norma Bell. Again, not related. So he doesn't come home a little bit later that afternoon, and his family gets concerned and they start to look for him. Neighbors start to look for him. There's a whole neighborhood search. And guess who else is in on the neighborhood search that's so concerned?
Guessing it's Mary and Norma?
Yeah, Mary and Norma. They search the streets, helping to look for little Brian. And of course, they're not successful. Until 11 p.m. that night, when a search party discovers Brian's body between 2 large concrete blocks in the Tin Lizzie. The first policeman to arrive on the scene noticed that it was a deliberate but feeble attempt to hide the body, because the body had also been covered up with clumps of grass and weeds. Cyanosis had set in upon Brian's lips. That's when the skin starts to turn blue because of lack of oxygen. And the policeman also noticed several bruises and scratches on Brian's neck and a pair of broken scissors next to his body. So the coroner, the medical examiner, does an examination of Brian, and he concludes that Brian died of strangulation, and he'd been dead for up to 7.5 hours before his body was discovered. So he's discovered at 11 o'clock at night. So early that afternoon is when he would have been murdered. It was noted that the killer had squeezed Brian's nose closed with one hand, and then they had put their hand on his throat, the other hand. The medical examiner also noticed a lot of puncture wounds on Brian's legs that were made before he died. And then sections of his hair had been cut out and his genitals had been mutilated with a razor.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah. And then a crude attempt had been made to carve the letter M into his stomach. Well, the coroner also noted that the amount of force used to murder Brian was so small that it would have had to have been another child.
Because it didn't like break his anything.
Right. There was also gray and maroon fibers discovered on Brian's clothing and his shoes. The fibers didn't come from anything in Brian's house, which meant they had to be transferred on his body by his murderer or murderers. So after Brian's body is discovered, there is a massive manhunt. Over 100 detectives from across Northumberland were assigned to the investigation, and more than 1,200 children were questioned about their whereabouts on the day of the murder. 2 children questioned by detectives on August 1st were Mary and Norma, who witnesses told investigators they had seen playing with Brian shortly before he was believed to have died. So initially, Norma was like excitable. She seemed really excitable in her interviews, and Mary was a little bit more evasive. Both girls were very vague and quite contradictory in their initial statements. They both say, yeah, we played with Brian on that day, but we didn't have anything to do with him after lunchtime, and we don't know anything about his death. Well, the next day, they're questioned a little bit more, and Mary says she remembers seeing an 8-year-old local boy playing with Brian on the afternoon of July 31st, and that she'd also seen him hitting Brian. She then states that she remembers that the boy had been covered in grass and weeds as if he'd been rolling in a field, and that he was in possession of a small pair of scissors. Mary then exclaims, I saw him try to cut off a cat's tail with the scissors, but there was something wrong with them. One leg was broken or bent. Now, we have to remember, Mary is 11 years old. She's not very smart. This is where she messes up. The scissors had been kept a secret from the public. This convinced Detective Chief Inspector DCI, I just love their initials over there anyway, DCI James Dobson, that Mary was in fact the killer. In addition, the local boy that she named and accused, he was actually at the Newcastle International Airport on the afternoon, and there was a bunch of witnesses to corroborate his and his parents' claims that he was at the airport.
Yeah. So it's pick the wrong kid there.
Right. So this is where the girls begin to break. So on August 4th, the parents of Norma contact police and they say Norma would like to confess about knowledge of the death of Brian Howe. Not that she did it, but just knowledge of it. So DCI Dobson goes to her house and he, reads Norma her rights or whatever, and then says, "What did you know?" And she tells him that Mary had taken her to a spot on the Tin Lizzie and that Mary had shown her where Brian's body was. She said that Mary then demonstrated how she had strangled Brian. Norma said that Mary had confessed to her that she enjoyed strangling him before describing how she had taken the scissors and put the marks all over his body, and then that she had tried to mark the M in his stomach. Norma takes police to the crime scene and she says the razor was hidden, and she shows them where the razor is. There was a drawing that Norma had made of the wounds of the boys on Brian's body, and they matched precisely to those described by the coroner. Mary, of course, had a visit from police at her home early on August 5th. So when they come to her house on this time, she's a bit defensive when she's, they're like, "Hey, look, this is what you said, but this is what, we know there's some discrepancies here." Well, I'm sure they probably didn't say discrepancies to an 11-year-old, but whatever. She says to them, "You're trying to brainwash me. I will get a solicitor to get me out of this." So not
cold.
That dumb.
No.
So later that same day, Norma's questioned again. This time, she makes a full statement saying, "Look, I was there when Mary strangled him. Like, I was there." She says that it was just the three of them in the Tin Lizzie, and Mary seemed to go all, quote, "all funny." She pushed the child in the grass and she attempted to strangle him. And then she said to Mary, "My hands are getting thick. Take over." And then she runs from the scene. Norma runs from the scene and she leaves Brian and Mary. So there's an examination of the girls' clothing, and the gray fibers that were found on Brian's body were a match to a wool dress that Mary owned. And the maroon fibers that were found on Brian's shoes were a match to a skirt that was owned by Norma. The same gray fibers from that wool dress were actually found on Martin Brown's body as well. So Brian Howe is buried in a local cemetery on August 7th of 1968. His funeral is attended by 200 people or more. According to DCI Dobson, who had actually planned to arrest Mary and Norma later that day, Mary actually stood outside of Brian's house as his coffin was brought outside from the house at the very beginning of the procession. DCI Dobson states, "She stood there laughing and rubbing her hands. I thought, my God, I've got to bring her in. She'll do another one." 11 years old and she's already got the villain hand rub down.
It almost feels like a bit, like, "Oh, this is what I'm supposed to do because I'm evil."
Right. So both girls are formally charged in the murder of Brian Howe. And in response, Mary says, "That's all right by me." Norma says, "I'll pay you back for this." They're in the presence of an independent witness. Mary writes a statement in which she admits to being present when Brian was murdered, but she insists that it was Norma that did it. She also admitted that she and Norma had broken into the nursery the day of Martin Brown's murder and defaced the property and left the 4 handwritten notes. So after they're arrested, both girls get a psychological evaluation. Norma's results say that she was intellectually delayed and a submissive character who displayed emotion, whereas Mary was bright and cunning and prone to sudden mood swings. Occasionally, Mary was willing to talk, but then she'd become sullen, introspective, and defensive. 4 different psychiatrists examined Mary, and they all concluded that she was not suffering from a mental disorder, but she did suffer from a psychopathic personality disorder. In an official report that was compiled for the Director of Public Prosecution, Dr. David Westbury says, "Mary's social techniques are primitive and take form of automatic denial, ingratiation, which is a technique where somebody tries to be liked, be likable,
Ingratiate yourself to someone, you try to impress them.
Right. denial, ingratiation, manipulation, complaining, bullying, flight, or violence. So the girls head to trial for the murders of Martin Brown and Brian Howe at Newcastle on December 5th of 1968. They're both tried before Justice Ralph Cusack. Both plead not guilty. On the first day of trial, the judge waives their rights to anonymity because of their age. So that meant the media was allowed to publicize their names, their ages, and photographs.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Right. Which is a big deal. You don't see that.
Yeah.
I mean, you see it more, I guess, nowadays, but anyway. So the
Basically
trial,
decided to try them as adults, as we would call it here in the US.
so the prosecution in his closing statements states that the defendants, despite their age difference, Mary was the more dominant of the two, and he said that the girls had acted in unison and were equally culpable, killing both children solely, quote, for the pleasure and excitement of murder. He said that both girls knew that what they did was wrong and what the results would be. So that was the closing statements of the prosecution. On the fifth day of the trial, well, it's time for the defense to take over. Norma testifies in her own defense, and she denies any culpability in the actual murder of either child, but does admit that she knew Mary had a penchant for violence, and she knew about her history of attacking children, and that the two had discussed attacking and killing small children of both genders. When she's questioned about Brian, she also said that as Mary began to attack and strangle Brian, that she had failed to alert a group of boys that were playing in the vicinity, stating that she failed to do so. She said, "I did not know what was going to happen in the first place." She had stopped hurting him for a bit when the boys were near. When she's questioned about her own role in the murder, she says, "I never touched the child." So next up is Mary. She testifies in her own defense. Her testimony lasts about 4 hours, and they had to adjourn at one occasion because she began crying in a policewoman's arms. They had both had policewomen sitting next to them. Mm-hmm. She denied Norma's accusations, and she insisted that she had seen the body of Martin, but that she had herself had never hurt him, and that Norma had later asked her to go to the boy's house and ask, "Hey, can I see his body?" That game of chicken. Mm-hmm. Mary said that she had told others about Martin's death, but only to get Norma put straight away.
Oh, yeah. I was doing it to help out.
So when Mary is questioned about Brian Howe's death, she claims that Norma was the one that had strangled him, and that she herself was just standing and looking. She says, "I couldn't move. It was as if some glue was pulling us down." Mary then says that Norma had encouraged Brian to lie down if he wanted some sweets, telling him, "You've got to lie down for the lady to come with the sweets." Then she strangles him with her bare hands. And Mary says she tried to prevent the attack. Mary also says that she could determine the level of force that Norma had exhibited because her fingertips and nails were going white. She again says she failed to inform the authorities. She was fearful of Norma, and that it was a misguided sense of loyalty. Norma's mother, Catherine, testifies, and she says several months prior to the murder of Brian Howe, she and her husband discovered that Mary had attempted to strangle Norma's younger sister, Susan, and that she had only let go of her when her husband had punched Mary in the shoulder.
Jeez.
All right. So now we're through the prosecution, we're through the defense, closing arguments. Norma's counsel delivers his closing argument to the jury, and he emphasizes that although both girls were on trial, there was no real evidence that showed that Mary had anything to do with any of the murders outside of Mary's accusations against her. Mary's attorney, he delivers his closing arguments, and he says, he talks about her broken background, her dysfunctional family, and her blur between reality and fantasy. He also references the testimony of Dr. David Westbury, who had testified on behalf of the defense that he had interviewed Mary on several occasions, and that he formed a definite view that the child suffered from a serious personality disorder that he classified as, quote, a retarded development of her mind that had been caused by both genetic and environmental factors. He said that this had impaired Mary's actual responsibilities for her acts. Well, do you think it works in their favor?
Gosh, I hope not, but maybe.
So the trial lasts for 9 days. On December 17th, the jury retires and they consider their verdict. They deliberate for 3 hours and 25 minutes before reaching the verdict. Mary Bell was cleared of murder, but she was convicted of the manslaughter of both boys on the grounds of this diminished responsibility because the court psychiatrist had convinced them that she showed the classic symptoms of psychopathy and that she couldn't be held responsible for her actions. So this was their way of being able to hold her responsible. Norma Bell was acquitted of all charges. She was said to have fallen under a bad influence.
Wow.
So when the girls hear the verdict, Norma claps her hands in excitement and Mary bursts into tears, and her mother and grandmother also cry. Judge Cusack, who was passing the sentence, described Mary as a dangerous individual, adding that she posed a very grave risk to other children and said that steps had to be taken to protect the public from her. She was sentenced and detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, which basically means an indefinite sentence of imprisonment. So there's no like set time.
Yeah, it's life without parole, or until we decide not.
Until we decide, we'll let you go.
But I mean, then it sounds so much nicer than it is.
Yeah,
you will be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure.
Her Majesty's
it's like, oh, that sounds great. And they have nice pillows, little mints on them. It's gonna be great.
So initially, Mary is taken to the Durham remand home. Then she's transferred to a second remand home in South Norwood. She's then again transferred to a secure unit in Red Bank for young offenders. And she's the only female inmate amongst about 24 inmates. She later claims that she was sexually abused by a member of staff and several inmates while at that facility. In November of 1973, she's 16 years old and she's transferred to the secure wing of Her Majesty's Prison Style in Cheshire. She resented her transfer to this facility, apparently. And then while she's incarcerated there, she applies for parole. In June of 1976, she's transferred to Moore Court, which is an open prison, where she takes a secretarial course. 15 months later, in September of 1977, she again makes national headlines when she and another inmate, Annette Priest, briefly escape from this open prison.
It's like that would happen when it's a place called the open prison.
Right. So in the UK, prisons are divided into 4 categories of security, depending on the crime, the sentence, the risk of escape, and violent tendencies. So you got A through D. A is the most secure and D is the least. So it looks like she was in kind of a low security prison, obviously, to be able to escape. So both of the girls spend several days in the company of some young men in Blackpool. They go to amusement parks. They sleep at various hotels. And Mary is using the alias Mary Robinson before the two split. That's the most teenage thing I've heard. Like, I've just escaped from prison. Let's go to an amusement park.
Well, I mean, it probably had never been able to go, or hadn't been able to go for a long time. Like, you can even see the scene where like Annette had been to one and Mary had never been to one, and they're talking about it, and Annette's telling her how great it is, and then Mary's like, "Hey, we should go."
So Mary Bell, or Mary Robinson, is arrested at the Derbyshire home of one of the guys. His name is Clive Shirtcliffe. She's arrested on September 13th, and she had actually dyed her hair blonde in an effort to disguise her identity. She's returned to custody. Annette Priest is arrested in Leeds a few days later. So Mary's penalty for breaking out was she lost her prison privileges for 28 days.
I mean, I'm just going to say worth it.
I guess.
I mean, that
amusement park was fun.
That feels like not that bad a sentence. Like, you got a whole, like, vacation in the middle of your sentence.
In June of 1979, it's announced that they have decided to transfer Mary to Her Majesty's Prison in Askham Grange. It's another open category prison, in an effort to prepare her for her eventual release into society, which was planned for the following year. In November of 1979, she works as a secretary, then a waitress at a cafe, and under supervision of the guidelines, again, preparing her for release. Mary Bell is released from Her Majesty's Prison, or HM Prison, Ascombe Grange, in May of 1980 at the age of 23, having served off almost 11 and a half years in custody. She's released on license, which meant she's technically like still serving her time, or like parole.
Yeah.
So once released, she's granted anonymity, which means she's given a new name, and she's allowed to start a new life in another country under an assumed identity. Upon her release, a spokesperson is quoted as saying, Mary Bell wishes to be given a chance to live a normal life and to be left alone. 4 years after her release from custody on May 25th of 1984, she gives birth to a baby girl, her only child. Her daughter knew nothing of her mother's past until 1998, when somehow, some way, reporters were able to discover her then current location in a resort town in Sussex Coast. She'd been living there for about 18 months. This isn't the first time that someone had discovered her identity. They were constantly having to move, but this was the first time that her daughter was informed of this. Her daughter was 14 at the time. So of course they have to leave. They're driven to a safe house by undercover police officers. And then they're again relocated to another part of the UK. Apparently Mary has returned to Tyneside on several different occasions in the years following her release. She's also alleged to have lived in that location for a long time, but nobody actually knows where she is. The right to anonymity was also granted to her daughter right after her birth. And initially it was only going to be until she hit 18. But then in May of 2003, Mary went back to court and she won a battle that not only provided her anonymity, but her daughter as well for her entire life. In 1998, Mary collaborated with author Gita Sereni to provide an account of her life before and after the crimes in the book called Cries Unheard, The Story of Mary Bell. In the book, Mary talks about the abuse she suffered as a child at the hands of her sex worker mom, who was also a dominatrix. She also tells of the alleged abuse that she received from several of her mom's clients. Other people interviewed in the book, relatives, friends, and professionals who knew her before, during, and after her imprisonment. Again, her current whereabouts are unknown, and she remains protected by that 2003 High Court order. According to Gita Sereni, Mary Bell does not claim she was wrongly convicted. She freely admits the abuse that she suffered as a child does not excuse her crimes. Not only is there a book by Gita Sereni, there's also a book by Ryan Becker and Nancy Vissay. It's called Mary Flora Bell, the horrific true story behind an innocent girl serial killer. On television, the BBC had a broadcast. It was an episode that focused on the crimes and the conviction of Mary Bell as part of their 1998 series, Children of Crime. It was a 48-minute episode, and it had interviews with several of her childhood peers and police officers that were assigned to the case. It first aired in April of 1998. Investigation Discovery, they commissioned a documentary that focused on the murders committed by Mary Bell as part of their true life crime documentary called Deadly Women. The episode was 45 minutes, and it was titled Youngblood, and it was first broadcast on August 20th of 2009. And that is the wild but true story of child serial killer Mary Bell.
So Norma was not found guilty of anything, and then was there anything talked about her getting anonymity as well?
No, she wouldn't need it. She wasn't convicted of anything.
Yeah, I guess that would be that'd be a tough life, like how do you go back to school the next week?
Right. But I mean, what would they protect her from, because she wasn't convicted of any crime? Yeah,
that's true. But I mean, that people are not gonna let that go, especially kids.
Yeah. I'm sure she had to move. I wouldn't be surprised if she had to move. Yeah. But there you go. That is the B-side.
So as I mentioned earlier, I got a little bit of a head cold, not the big bad virus this week, but it was because I got to go to a concert this weekend of a band that I wanted to go to a concert of back in 1998. Understandably, my parents did not want a 17-year-old me and a couple friends going to downtown Minneapolis to an 18 plus show because we were not 18. So that got shot down very quickly, and I never got to go to see Local H perform. So I was at the Turf Club on Monday night, and all weekend I was getting ready for this concert. And the band's, heyday, the two biggest albums were 96 and 2002. And so I was very much in this mind space of kind of, 17-year-old me and what was going on in my life at that time. And I was thinking about that spring and summer that I wished to go to the concert, especially the fall of 98, which was the fall of my senior year of high school, where I felt probably about as indestructible as humanly possible. And I loved movies. So we went to movies almost every weeknight. And one that I was so excited about coming out, I had read about it as I, have one to do in Entertainment Weekly for months leading up to it. And it had two young actors that I was super interested in their careers and where they were going to go. And it also had a subject that I knew absolutely nothing about except from watching movies, and wanted to learn everything I could because I thought it was going to be really cool. So in the September of 1998, was released nationwide on September 11th. The film was called Rounders, starring Matt Damon and Ed Norton, who are two of my all-time favorite actors. And honestly, I don't know that I've ever seen a Matt Damon movie where I didn't enjoy his character. I'm sure there's one out there, but I've pretty much enjoyed everything that he's ever been in. And this was the start of his career. We just had Good Will Hunting. We talked about Titan AE a couple weeks ago, where he was the voice of the hero in that one as well. And I was super excited because the idea of playing poker and cards seemed so fun and romanticized to me, because really all I knew about it was it happened in James Bond movies and in Maverick with Mel Gibson and James Garner. And that was it. So I needed to learn as much as I could about poker. It came out. It was a lot of fun. I think it's one of those movies that can be on when you're flipping channels and you'll always jump in and start watching it if you've seen it before and just get caught. There are some great performances. I mean, Ed Norton is understated in this, and it's at the beginning of his career. He had just finished doing American History X, and he was in the client, it wasn't The Client, it was Primal Fear. And Primal Fear, he plays, this, like, by the end, you realize he's a psycho, but seems very meek and mild in it. And then he goes to American History X, and he just plays this crazy neo-Nazi. And one of the fun things, and there are 10 things that will, or a few things that because all 10 of them aren't that interesting.
Wait a minute, is Primal Fear the one that, I want to say Jean-Luc Picard. What's his name? Jean-Luc Picard. What's his real name?
Patrick Stewart.
Patrick Stewart. Is that the one where he's in and he's the Nazi as well?
So Primal Fear is the one where he's in jail and Richard Gere comes to him and they're trying to get him out of, like, he's an altar boy who's charged with the murder of a Roman Catholic priest, and he's defended by Richard Gere, and then you find out at the end that he's just a psychopath. Right. And then American History X, I don't think Patrick Stewart was in American History X. I'm looking at it right now. Then Ed Norton, Edward Furlong.
No, I don't think he's in that one. There is one that Patrick Stewart is a Nazi. I was thinking it was okay.
You're thinking of Ian McClellan, and with young Brad Renfro.
No, wait, it might be called Green Room. I might be totally. Yep, it's called Green Room. So I'm totally off. Anton Yelchin, Imogen Poots.
Okay. So that was more recent, 2015.
Okay. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Edward Norton, his understated best before he became just completely ridiculous to work with, as the reports have been, which impacted his career and made him lose the role of Bruce Banner in the Hulk movie and in the entire MCU. But at this point, they're both so young and the performances are genuine, and the movie has so many great supporting actors. You've got John Malkovich in there. You've got another one of those guys that shows up in every film where you're like, I kind of know this guy. He plays. God, I'm so bad with names. Like we know about this. John Turturro is in it as well.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah.
the guy Martin Landau plays his like professor who gives him money at one point. Gretchen Mol, who's amazing, and didn't have as big a career as I thought she would after this. And then why is it not popping? Why is the guy's name not popping up?
Because you want it so bad.
Because I'm trying to get it so bad, and like I can't get a picture from him anywhere. But the guy's name was Michael Rispoli. He plays Grandma in the movie, but he's been in, he was on Soprano. He just looks like a thug. And he was also in the Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. Yeah, he's like that Italian American, stock character actor, but he does a great job as sort of John Malkovich, Teddy KGB's underling who works with him. But the story, if you don't remember, basically focuses around. And it's ironic that this movie was filmed right after Good Will Hunting. So in Good Will Hunting, Matt Damon plays a math prodigy. And then his next movie is Rounders, where he's a law student who's a poker prodigy, or like a really good poker player. Kind of like seems like the same, going to the pizza and getting, one sausage and pepperoni, and then you got one that's just double pepperoni. Pretty much the same thing, back to back. But he plays a gifted poker player named Mike McDermott. And the movie starts out with one of the great opening scenes where you're not even really sure what's happening yet, but he's going around and he's finding hidden money all over his house. It's books or hidden behind this or, in a sock drawer. So it draws you in right away because you're like, oh my gosh, what's he going to get all this cash for? Starts out, and one of the things that I love about it is that for a movie about poker, even that came out before the big poker boom of like the early 2000s, like 2004 to 2014, where poker was like considered a sport and everyone was paying attention to the World Series of Poker for a long time, and online poker went crazy. Instead of immediately glorifying the success, the very first poker scene, he loses his entire bankroll, has to give up playing poker, almost loses his relationship, and quits playing poker and gets a job as a janitor to help pay for law school. So it starts out, and we're like, okay, we're not going to glamorize this. We're not going to start out with a bunch of wins and build up the enthusiasm. We're going to start at rock bottom, and then almost make it seem like this movie's not going to be about poker. Until his friend, played by Ed Norton, shows up in an incredibly wonderfully written character name, Lester Worm Murphy, which you immediately hear that character name and you're like, okay, we know who this guy is going to be. He comes back into town, drags Mike back into the poker scene. And then you really, the ball really starts to roll. We've got money launderers and people are stealing money, and Mike's, losing money because Worm is playing on his credit at a poker club. And it begins to snowball until the ultimate last poker game, which is after Mike and Worm have split up, and Worm is on the run and probably never coming back, and they'll likely not have any relationship going forward. And Mike is trying to pay off both his and Worm's debt, which he's now assumed. And it has a great final scene of a movie, which draws you into the point, like if you ever go to a poker game or you're even just playing poker at somebody's house, lines from that final scene will show up over and over again, especially the very last. And spoiler alert, Mike survives, but he beats Teddy KGB, who was played ultimately incredibly well by John Malkovich. And John Malkovich, Teddy KGB, is like, give the man his money. Give him man his money. He's very mad and makes everything go. And so like every time I lose a hand playing even penny poker since 1998, sitting playing for like fruit snacks, sitting in the dorm, I'm like, give the man his money every time I lose, which I lose a lot, which is why I'm not a good poker player. But the film itself was made for $12 million. It ended up grossing almost 23. It became a cult classic during the early 2000s and the big poker boom. But there are a few things about it that I did not realize, or I found out doing a little bit of research this week for the A side. One, both Matt Damon and Ed Norton, as the film was being talked about, got invited to play in the World Series of Poker for a $10,000 buy-in. And
wait a minute, doesn't he like now play kind of more often, or he did for a while because of
I
that.
know there's like a celebrity poker tour that I think I've seen both of them on
Okay,
at one
okay.
point. But this was in like the real, like the big thing in Vegas, and it was not as open as it is now. Like now you can like qualify in like online tournaments and regional tournaments to get there. Back then it seemed to be a bigger deal. Like we're just having random people off the street getting into the World Series of poker.
Right.
And so Mike, Matt Damon's character in the movie, is constantly talking about the greats of poker, and he quotes Doyle Brunson, who's an old school a poker guy for years, still playing, but older guy, who always wears a big Texas, wear a big cowboy hat. I call it a Texas hat because I'm from the city. Big cowboy hat. And he actually, in real life, Matt Damon lost to Doyle Brunson in the World Series of
Oh, wow.
poker. So it kind of came full circle there. The most of was filmed in New York, yada yada yada. We knew that. Norton, used to improvise his lines as he does and everything. It's another reason that people get a little annoyed with him, because he'll just go off script and do his own thing. And sometimes it's better, that's. But people don't like that so much. But the film actually had its origins when the two screenwriters, Brian Koppelman and David Levian, were in New York City, and Koppelman decided to go to a private poker club. So he goes to a private poker club in New York City and loses his entire bankroll of $750. And then at 2:30 in the morning, in something that only a writer will do, calls his friends and says, "Hey, we have to write a movie about this. It was so cool." He just lost his entire bankroll, but to him, he's gonna be a write-off because he's gonna write about the entire scene. So that made me very, very happy, because sometimes looking at life as having good stories to tell is one of my favorite things to do. So it was born out of an actual poker loss that then went on to be something quite big. So it was, like I said, a moderate hit. It's a much bigger cult classic now, and you can find it streaming. Okay, Rotten Tomatoes gave it 64% from critics, but audience score is 87, which does not surprise me at all. It is a type of movie that if you haven't seen in a while and you're settling down with some popcorn for a date night, it is a little more of a traditional guy movie, but there's definitely a lot there to talk about on a date, because you're like, why do you make that decision? Boy, I should never do that. If you ever do that to me, I'm totally going to leave you as well. So those are good things that you can talk about in a date movie. It sparks conversation. You can watch it on, if you're a subscriber to Fubo or Showtime or DirecTV with Showtime. It's available to rent on Amazon, Google Play, YouTube, Redbox, Apple TV, all those. And you can also get it, of course, on Amazon as a DVD, which I, of course, still have my original copy from the early 2000s, which I no doubt bought when a Blockbuster or a Hollywood Video was closing, because you can tell it has been retaped a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I almost forgot, Famke Janssen has a small part in this movie, and she is on my list of people that I do not think became a big enough star, and I don't know why. Of course, she was Ivana Onatopp in the first Pierce Brosnan movie. She was Pierce Brosnan James Bond movie. She was Jean Grey in the X-Men movies, and for some reason didn't ever just completely blow up, which I thought was a bit of a shame. She got really typecast into being the Russian. And then all of a sudden there weren't as many Russian roles because we had to pretend that they weren't the bad guys anymore. But now we're back, so maybe it's time for her to have a career renaissance. We're back. And of course, the other line besides "give the man his money" that will pop up at every like house poker game, or somebody's playing cards, or even somebody's just being clever. And I'm sure everyone listening has heard this at one time or another, is of course Mike McDermott's favorite quote. Listen, here's the thing. If you can't spot the sucker in your first half hour at the table, then you're the sucker.
Oh.
Which I have said in so many non-gambling contexts, it's not funny. But it's a great line and will always stick with me. And I can even hear Matt's cadence on the delivery. So it is a great film. So check it out. Rounders available on those streaming services. All the links to my sources will be on our website, as they always are, just as all the links for the Newcastle Strangler or the Tyneside Strangler. What was her name? Mary Bell?
Mary Bell.
Mary Bell and Norma Bell, who got away, who didn't get in trouble for anything. And I wonder if she had a worse life having to live with it than the one who got anonymity, but it's a different question. All available on our website, aside, bside podcast.square.site. You can check that out. We've got merchandise on there. You can subscribe to us on all of the various streaming platforms. You can buy Brooke a coffee while she's doing the editing, or for me, it would be a hot chocolate because my voice is about done. And yeah, check us out on the social medias. Let us know. Like Brooke's story this week came from a listener who wanted to ask, hey, is this something you guys have talked about? To let us know if there's anything that you think we should check out, or if there's a movie that you think I should watch that no one else can find that I'll probably have to buy on DVD, off a strange site. But let me know. That sounded bad.
That is your thing, though. Finding movies.
Mainstream movies, not of a certain genre, off a strange site. I gotta be real careful what I put out there in the ether. Be reviewing Debbie Does Dallas here or something. That's not going to go over well.
I don't think either mom would like that at all.
No, that's not gonna fly.
All right. Well, it's been another episode. I can't believe we're at 1:15. It's amazing. And of course, you know what? Enjoy every week because I get to talk to you, Adam. Not like we don't talk during the week. It sounds like we don't ever talk except for on the podcast, which is totally not true.
I mean, it's the only time we actually talk. Like, we'll text all week.
That's true.
I think one of the weird things about modern society is how often, and I'm just realizing this over the last 3 years, how often I have learned to just not talk to people. Like, I'll text all day, I'll send emails, I'll be on Slack. But then all of a sudden I get this random Zoom message like, hey, do you have 5 minutes for a Zoom at work? And I'm like, what is voice for? I'll speak words.
Oh, man. All right. There we go. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you, Brooke.